Hello and welcome to the Final Whistle podcast. My name's Harry, and as usual, I'm joined by Bobby here. And today we're also joined by Jason from the Rams Review podcast, as we're going to be discussing Derby County and their complicated and chaotic situation at the moment. Thanks for joining us, Jason. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thanks for having us on, lads. Could have been worse after the first weekend, couldn't it?
Yeah, that's it. I got a good draw there for you against Huddersfield. Obviously, as a Forest fan, I wasn't hoping that you'd do so well on the first day and to get the points. We didn't do as well. We'll move. But yeah, Bob, we'll start with you.
Oh yeah, sure. So obviously, as we know, Derby are in a bit of a financial crisis at the minute. So obviously, as this currently sit under a transfer embargo, how do you think like the guys over at Derby will do this season with like all the restrictions in place and stuff like that?
Well, yeah. If all the restrictions stay in place, Derby don't add any more to the squad. There's still a lot of uncertainty on if that's going to happen. But I'll go with what we've got at the minute. Before a ball was kicked on Saturday, I was less enthusiastic. After seeing the performance that we put in on Saturday, whilst it wasn't fantastic, it was limited. There will be limitations. I think it's not quite as bad as first feared. However, what I would say is beyond the 11, it did look, well, I think every single substitute was under 18. So that kind of tells you there's going to be a lot riding on luck this season, I think, for Derby. And if they can keep injuries, away, then great. If they can add to the squad, even better. If they can't, if they're going to go with what they've got, that they're certainly going to need some luck with injuries along the way. And of course, again, it's going to be a very, very similar 11 week in, week out, which is going to take its toll on various individuals, I would have thought. As I say, injuries always crop up, players running in and out of form. That's why they're in the Championship. It's not great. Let's be honest. I'm not going to beat around the bush with this. It's not. I'm not full of optimism for the season, but they did it last year on the last day. Of course, the squad you've got to arguably say is in a worse position as we stand right now.
Yeah.
But at least we managed to get a couple of centre backs in, so at least we can actually field an 11. I think that was the thing after Saturday. It was, well, actually, yeah, we can field an 11. Okay, it was only against Huddersfield. No disrespects to Huddersfield, but difficult to say where they're going to be this season. Probably lower end of the league, you would have thought. So it was a decent benchmark. It was a decent benchmark. There's obviously a couple of games coming up for Derby. Our next two, actually, we've got Peterborough away and Hull away. So two promoted sides. You would argue that they're the ones that Derby probably going to be fighting at that end of the table. It's not a bad early marker to see where Derby are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the key things as well, obviously there's the embargo on you, but then also to do with the accounts having to be resubmitted because of the fiddling of how it was all put by the board. And I think the worrying thing for you guys will be if the accounts go back and there's something wrong, you might end up with a points deduction as well in there. Do you think that it's going to be basically just a struggling battle this season of, as you said there, you're going to have to take all the luck you can, but it's going to be really, really difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, no question about it. Yeah, the accounts thing, the 18th of August, we've got till, I believe. So we're only, nine days away from that. They have to be submitted by that point. In terms of then obviously the turnaround of the EFL approving them or, coming up with some form of sanction. We're still rolling on with the EFL, but the kind of like the first disrepute charge that Derby came up against, it took nearly 18 months. So who knows what the state of play will be. I think the EFL are nailed on to try and nail Derby with something. They managed to get this with an appeal. I would have thought that from the EFL's perspective, they will move as quickly as they can when they see the state of the books. My point from that would be, if Derby thought they were home and hosed with them, why haven't they already put them in? Why are they, what seems like they're dragging their heels right till the 18th? Are they doing that just to 2 fingers up to the EFL and go, well, we'll do it on our own time? I don't know. Maybe there's been mind games between Derby County and the EFL for the last 3 years. So who knows if that's the reason. On our podcast, we had Kieran Maguire, the financial expert, who's obviously had a lot of involvement with Derby, covering Derby over the last 2 or 3 years. And he said that even with the resubmission of accounts, everything that he believed and with what he'd spoken to, Derby would probably just squeak under. That nobody knows. These figures aren't readily available, so it's difficult to say. But he took somebody who's obviously got great financial experience and knows what he's talking about when it comes to FFP and things like that. Then he thinks Derby, they're close to the wind. If not, they'll squeak under. If they squeak under, then fine. My guess would be if the EFL knew that they were going to squeak under, I'd be surprised why they'd go through the whole process of appealing and going through it, which is obviously costing multiple clubs money. So I can't get my head around that one. I don't think many Derby fans can get their head around that one. Why are they persisting with trying to catch Derby out if there's nothing to be caught out with? So that's a worry, a huge worry. And I suppose it is, in some respects, it is difficult to look beyond the 18th. And I'm sure after the 18th, hopefully something will be said sooner rather than later. They don't want this charge or this uncertainty in what's already going to be a very uncertain season for Derby hanging over the Reds. You don't want that Derby do okay, get to Christmas time, mid to low table, few points on the board, then all of a sudden they're slapped with a 12-point penalty or whatever. It's going to be an absolute kick in the teeth. Again, from everything that we've spoken with, it's one of those where there's not too many clubs that the EFL have actually punished with this. And each club that they have punished with have been varying in severity, because they've been quite variable in actually the breaches of FFP. So, I mean, I think it's 4 lots of accounts, 4 years worth of accounts. And of course, the thing is, if Derby fail on the first one now, their argument will be, well, you can't then punish us for the next 3. Otherwise, we wouldn't have spent like that in the first one, if you get my meaning. All these accounts were signed off by the EFL originally. So I struggle to see where they've got a leg to stand on, but I'm no financial expert. So I honestly don't know. I think some obviously are fearing the worst, that Derby are going to get slapped with points deduction for each season. I don't think they can do that. I mean, they can try, but I think Derby will certainly appeal that to the Hill, because normally spending is set with, how your accounts are looking. On the flip side to that is, if Derby haven't produced accounts for 4 years, how did they know how much they could and couldn't spend? Yeah, you would presume that there'd be a ballpark. Our chief executive and financial directors, he's pretty clued up in this kind of thing. You'd have to think they would have had a rough estimation of what it's going to be. But again, it's difficult to say at the minute until the actual facts and figures come out. Where it's all a guess. Some side of the fan base has got on the half cup empty. Some have got on the half glass full. It's the way that it is. And I suppose until it comes out in the wash, then nobody's going to be any clearer exactly how bad it could get for Derby this season. Yeah,
I think one of the really interesting stories that came out over the summer, obviously when all the rumours come out of over the summer, was that with this financial mess, there was rumours that Wycombe were going to be just trying to sue or something to get them back into the Championship. Obviously, they went down, and you guys survived. I don't think there was any way they could probably have played that anyway. I think they weren't good enough to stay up anyway. So really, I don't think that argument would have stood. But with difficult times, obviously, at Forest we had Fawaz, who was an idiot in charge. And we nearly went under at one point, and that was horrible. And obviously you've got Mel Morris in charge, who can be a bit of a controversial figure with some of the things he comes out and says. Obviously he was contradicting Rooney the other day about signings, which kind of makes you think about the type of relationship that Rooney and the board actually have. What are your feelings towards him as a head at your club, and just, what are your thoughts on how he's running it all?
it's very difficult to make an opinion and an assumption of way things are going when it's not your own money. And I think most Derby fans that I've certainly spoke to, obviously who we come across doing our podcast, you will hear the majority of them now turning around and saying, okay, thanks for what you've done, but get out. And that is the general consensus. Again, if it was my millions in there, I think it would come across a little differently. I think something that came out, they did a fans forum. I don't know if you know about this. They did not a fans forum. It was an invited fans thing, which a very select few were allowed to attend, and basically were told you're not allowed to talk about too much what was discussed. So I can only go on what's kind of been reported. And we know that Mel's been trying to sell the club for the best part of 2.5 years. He said he wanted to leave, but even with, obviously, as we well know, and I'm sure we'll touch on it later, two at least that we know of in the public domain, 2 failed takeover attempts by people I am very glad didn't get anywhere near this club. He has continued to bankroll it. Okay, it might not be the 15-20 million that Derby have spent in previous transfer windows, but at the end of the day, Derby's wage budget, probably until last season, I think we've cleared out quite a bit, up till last season, must have been a hefty wage bill. In COVID football, no income coming in. There was only really one person that funded that. I know we did take out loans, but still, it's on his head. So he owns the club. It's his debt at the end of the day at this moment in time. It's funny. In fact, we just released today a podcast, and we've actually had we got the Peterborough chairman on, and if you ever come across him, he's a very interesting character. And I didn't do the interview. It was with Corey, because the guy's over in the States, and he just shot straight for an hour talking about how difficult it is to run a football club, it being your own money. Fans call in for one. You basically the fans will call you for whatever decision you make, and it's really difficult. But he was, obviously, we touched on this thing with Mel, and he said, well, I don't really know the guy, but if it was me in that position, I'd want some slack cut for everything that he's done at Derby. And I think that's the thing. I think you have to take it as a whole. He has done quite a lot for the city of Derby. He's done quite a lot for the club. Ultimately, his main objective was to get Derby in the Premier League, which he failed. I mean, obviously, we came very, very close on more than one occasion, but his actual remit is that he wanted to get Derby into the Premier League and beyond, and that ultimately failed. One of the reasons why he realizes now it's probably too much. It's going to take too much resources that he's willing to put in for him to go again, because Derby have been stripped back to where they probably were 5-10 years ago. So actually, the club's probably in a worse position than it actually was when he took over. I've got a lot of respect for him for what he did. He's a Derby fan. I think everybody wants the club to be run by somebody who cares about the club. Derby have had it in the past where they've had people who aren't interested in running the club as a Forest. And whilst things are rosy in the garden, fans will get on board with it. But as soon as that changes, obviously, it becomes probably even more toxic, actually. Probably get less leeway. But patience is running out with Mel. I don't necessarily think it's fully deserving of it all. But at the end of the day, the things that are going on in current times at Derby County are down to his leadership. Now, he will fully admit that he's made massive mistakes in the past. Probably it still makes them now. He's always tried his hardest to put them right. Sometimes you can't always do that. Football's one of those difficult games. I mean, look at last season. I hate to think where Derby would be right now if they had got relegated. I mean, it would have been even worse. We think it's bad at the minute. I think it would have been even worse. So I've got a lot of time. I've got a lot of time for the man. I think he's tried his hardest. He's just ultimately not managed to achieve what he wanted. Which, I mean, he's tried. He's tried a few different ways as well, and unfortunately, none of them have seemed to have got to that end goal of becoming sustainable in the Premier League. I mean, if we'd have gone up that first season he kind of took over, was the QPR final, He did have a stake in the club at that point. I don't know how much it was. I don't think he was a minority shareholder, but he took full control of the club straight after that. And of course, he was thinking we were 30 seconds away from being in the Premier League technically.
Yeah.
All I'm going to need to do is throw a couple of million at this next season, and Derby are a surefire to get promoted.
Yeah.
He thought that. The whole club thought that. The whole fan base thought that. Most of the league thought that. I mean, we were top with 12 games to go, and then the back end just fell out of it, and it's felt very, very much so since that point. He's been fighting fires. It's just how it feels. Okay, the football on the pitch stayed decent for another 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think behind the scenes, there was. I think he threw that money at it, fully expecting to get Derby promoted. It didn't work. And then as soon as you do that, year one, you start throwing those 25, 30,000 a week contracts out for one season in the Championship when you've got the windfalls of the Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
You could balance that. But then when these players were signing 3-4 year contracts and they're still at the club 3 years down the line and we're still in the Championship, again, comes full circle to why the accounts now for the last 4 years are probably very, very iffy at best.
Yeah.
He put all his eggs in one basket and it failed, basically. But he did a lot. It's not just on the pitch, things he did off the pitch with the academy, things like that. I mean, Derby's, I think it's the 8th best academy in Europe, or, things like that. We do get a decent return from it. It's probably not as good as we'd like it to be, but, it does okay. Most of the, there's quite a few in there at the minute, so we can't argue too much. So all in all, he's done quite a bit, but there was a refresh needed at Derby, and it started with the players. It then worked up towards the manager, and eventually, how much, if he wanted to leave 2.5 years ago, how much heart and soul is he actually putting into it now? That's been the question that we've said. He is a Derby fan, so you would think he would always do it, but there has got to be, in any walk of life, if you want out of something for 2.5 years, I don't think you're putting 100% in. I don't think your focus is fully there, and I think you can feel that he's gone completely off the radar with talking to fans. He's gone. He was on Radio Derby every 3 months, saying how good things were. We haven't heard. I know he's had some health issues, but for somebody who was so vocal and was so in the media and was so out there for fans to reach, basically has been under a rock for the last 2 years, and you can't really get 2 words out of him. That's not just me as a podcaster, but the mainstream media struggle to get hold of him. Or get a word out of him, then it's time for him to go. And I wish it would have been under better circumstances. I wish he'd have been able to leave on a higher note. Unfortunately, I think he's soured a few relationships on the way, and I think most Derby fans are happy to see the back of him.
Yeah, and obviously with the embargo, and you touched on there was a large clear out of players from the end of last season. For those that aren't aware, Derby's current embargo, they're only allowed to sign I think it's 5 players at the moment, and you're only allowed them on a 12-month contract if it's permanent, or a 6-month loan. So not a lot of space to maneuver, really. You did bring in as the goalkeeper Ryan Alsop, so you've got 3 keepers now, and then the 2 defenders, Curtis Davis and Richard Stearman, as well as former United midfielder Ravel Morrison. So some good reinforcements there. You needed the 2 centre-backs because you had none in the squad.
Yep.
But your squad's now up to, I think, 17 players. I looked earlier. How happy are you with those that have been brought in, and how do you think you'll manage, obviously, with injuries and bans? Obviously, Jason Knight got injured in training by Rooney, which was just one of those things you couldn't write. But how happy are you with those? And yeah, it's a bit of an iffy one.
No, I know where you're coming from, Harry. Well, I'm quite happy because this time last week it didn't, from everything that was coming out of the club, it didn't look like we was going to bring anybody in. And of course, just before the game against Huddersfield, we had a pre-season just across the road from you at Notts County, and that was a tip towards the starting 11. We had an under 18 and a left back playing at centre half. So things have progressed. Obviously, Curtis Davis, he's been at the club, I think it's 5-6 years now. Yeah. I actually didn't realise. They interviewed him after the game on Saturday, and I didn't realise he'd actually been at Derby for that long. It doesn't feel that long, but you know, you know what you're getting with Curtis Davis. He was all. I think he's also some part. He's going to be some part of the coaching role. You know, involved in that because he's doing his badges and stuff like that. He wanted to stay. You know, you say about the embargo, and we can only sign players on $4,500 a week. Well, how many players are going to want to come and play in the Championship for a team that looks, I hate to say the word dead set for relegation, but let's face it, I can't argue with that. Derby are one of the favourites to go down. Who's going to want to come with all that for that kind of money? You know, we had Sonia Luco on trial, and he's gone to Ipswich in League One because they can offer him more money. It's one of those. They're doing, with the hands tied behind the back, they're doing the business that they need to do. They did need, if I looked at Derby in a perfect world, what did they need from last season going forward? They needed new centre-halves. Curtis Davis didn't play a great deal of last year. He was out with, I think he did his ACL in about October, so he missed the majority of the season. So he is almost like a new signing. We'd have had to bring in at least one other centre off anyway. We got Richard Stearman. Is Richard Stearman the name that we all wanted? Probably not. Is he a Championship journeyman? Possibly. Is he a steady Eddie? Yeah. These signings are for 12 months. So if financial things change, obviously still wanting a takeover to happen, it means that you're not having to shift players out on 3-year contracts next season and things like that. So I can understand why they've done it. What else was about? That was the thing for me. Obviously, we had Jagielka on trial. Everything that's coming out of the club is still that they want him to come. I think as of last week, or certainly it might be today, the remaining trialists who we had on are no longer training with us. I think so. It's all about whatever boxes we can tick with the EFL, because I know that there's one big one. The submission of the accounts lifts the embargo, for instance. There is another one in there that I think kind of changes the ballpark a little bit, where instead of only 4,500 a week, we can actually offer them 11. You would think Jagielka, would he really come to Derby for a swan song for 4,500? Probably not. Probably not. I'm not saying that he's money grabbing, but you know, that this is just football. So it'd be interesting to see. They would, for me, need another reinforcement at centre half. They need another striker. We had Sam Baldock on trial. Didn't particularly pull up any trees in any pre-season. He played in every pre-season game. Didn't really pull up any trees, but he'd be a body through the door. Ravel Morrison's the interesting one. We were in a very similar situation 18 months ago when we signed Colin Kazim-Richards, and everybody went, "What? Why?" And then look, arguably had the best season of his career, and arguably was Derby's best player of the season, or one of, at least he'd be in the conversation. So Ravel Morrison does feel a very, very similar thing. Can Derby look out twice and get a player? Because I think if you can get him firing, then he's going to be a really good player. You would hope. It's going to be interesting to see how that one rides out. But we were desperate for that an attacking force. We were second lowest goal scorers last season. Tells you everything that you need to know. We conceded, I think, third highest amount. So you need to look at your back line, and you've got to start putting balls in the back of the net. They were the two main things. So I think embargo and transfer trouble and whatever aside, they were the areas of the pitch that Derby needed to strengthen. Have they managed to bring in probably the caliber of player that they wanted? No, but it's a stopgap. And as I say, it's certainly better than 5 or 6 of the under-18s playing, who, no disrespect to them, they'll probably come on in the next 18 months to 2 years and be first team regulars. I can't say that they won't be, but trying to throw 6 or 7 kids in all at once in a league that's as demanding as the Championship is, and then expect to keep Derby up, he's asking, he's a bit unfair, really. It's asking too much. So I think the business is, for what we're working in, I don't think you can be too disheartened. There are bodies coming through the door. That didn't look likely a couple of weeks ago. It'll just be interesting to see what more, if we can move the goalposts a little bit more and have that little bit more flexibility. The loan market could be massive for Derby. You'll know yourselves, you only need to find one or two loan players. Derby found one or two loan players, 3 years ago and got to the playoff final. Am I expecting Derby to bring in that caliber of loan? No, but two of those players that Derby got on loan were an unknown quantity, and they turned out to be, playing for England 12 months later. So you never know what kind of a gamble that kind of thing takes. But again, with the loan thing, I don't think many Premier League clubs are going to want their youngsters to come for only 6 months. So that little bit needs to change where we can sign, full season loans. And I think if that's the case, obviously you can have up to, is it 5 in a squad or 6 in a squad? You can pick 4, you can pick out 5, add that to the 17. You're already at 22. Bring one more in 23. So you've got a squad that then looks a little bit better on paper, looks a little bit stronger, gives Derby a better chance of surviving this season. But I still think it is a survival.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, with all of this going on, all the factors we've been talking about, in your honest opinion, do you think that the EFL have it out a little bit for Derby, or do you think the punishment and all this is sort of fair and coming to you eventually, or what do you think? What do you think? How is it fair?
It's my honest opinion, bit of both.
Yeah,
I think Derby have done some wrong things. They might, if they're listening to this, they might argue that point. Anything that they've done, is it really illegal? Not so sure. Have they tried to pull the wool over people's eyes? Almost definitely.
Yeah.
They found loopholes. I mean, some would look at it, well, you were smart enough to find those loopholes. The thing is that's all well and good, but if you are having to do that, I think the infrastructure is wrong to start off with.
Yeah.
If you're having to do things to manipulate financial fair play, you're clearly not on a sound footing anyway. To be doing it for so many years. I've heard
you've gone against the rules, but realistically, should those rules even be there in the first place? Because for a club to run, surely they shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to something when I know that obviously the big one and what the main trouble is with Derby, and certainly what the appeal's all about, is the amortisation policy. And when 91 out of 92 FAL clubs do it one way and Derby do it another, you're going to start smelling a rat. There's a reason why only one club's doing it like that. Again, that's not to say that we didn't find a loophole and go, yeah, we can do that. And the big bugbear about all of this has been that the EFL signed these accounts off. And now they're starting to go, well, just hang on a minute there. And that's where I think it is a little bit of a beat up from the EFL. I think that now, to use language, Derby have pissed off the EFL, and the EFL now are trying to, they're just trying to get their own back on them.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, in that sense, there is only going to be one winner, and that will be the EFL. In my honest opinion, I don't know how it can't be. But I think they're being a bit petty with some of it. They're certainly trying to make an example. I would fully expect that once all this is out of the wash, it's like, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, not only Derby that have done it, Sheffield Wednesday have done it, a couple of other clubs have done it, where they've refinanced the stadium. That's now, you can't do that.
Yeah.
That's not towards FFP.
Yeah.
So this next one, where Derby found this little loophole, if they get found guilty or not guilty or whatever it may well be, there will be a law that comes out that says, right, amortization, this is the way that you have to do it. And for anybody that doesn't understand anything about that, because obviously I've read about this a lot, that the AFL say that there's a depreciation on players year on year.
Mm-hmm.
Derby think that's not quite the case, because you could have somebody on a 4-year contract, £10 million, it's £2.5 million a year towards your accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Derby look at it and go, well, actually, if that player starts off really well, they might actually be worth 12 million. And then they have 2 mediocre seasons, so they drop to 6. And it's then at the final season where they lose their value. So they're doing it's exactly the same, but it's different amounts are being put towards FFP. And the AFL now decide that they've got a bit of a bugbear with that. But as I said at the beginning of that, when 91 clubs are doing it one way and there's only one that's doing it the other. No wonder somebody's sniffed around that. If there was a few others doing it, fine, but there wasn't. So Derby kind of deserve what they're going to get, whatever that may well be, because they have tried to bend the rules. I don't think you can put it any other way. But I do think the AFL are trying. They're trying a little harder, shall we say, to get these sanctions against Derby than they might against some others.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe another thing we could look at, moving on from the financial side of things. Obviously, Wayne Rooney came in as sort of like a player type of thing, and it was quite of a shock to quite a lot of people. And obviously now he's announced as the manager. When he was announced that he was going to take over as the manager for your old manager, was it Kuko, you said, I think? At the time, obviously now you might feel differently, but at the time, how were you feeling about it? Obviously with like the large wages that Wayne Rooney is going to take from Derby.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, it was all a bit of a PR stunt when he signed as a player. And I think most of us turned around and went, well, he'll be the next manager. Why wouldn't he be? It's not as if football on the field was going fantastic under Cocu anyway. So it was always a case of, well, chances are that when Cocu gets sacked or decides to walk or whatever, there's a ready-made replacement, sort of. I think that was the, work with Frank Lampard. Why wouldn't it work with Wayne Rooney? I can buy all that.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, I'd love to know who's actually paying Wayne Rooney's wages, because I don't think it's Derby County, because I don't think they could afford to. So, and there were people calling for Wayne Rooney's head last season, and I thought, that's just, it's never going to happen if what I believe, what I think, it's only what I think, I don't know, but what I think is that Derby, as Derby County, on the books, Derby County are paying Wayne Rooney, will be a fraction of what he's actually earning. Why on earth would they get rid of that? Because they're probably not going to be able to bring anybody else in for that kind of money. That is my honest opinion. That's where I think it is. The fans have got a bit more on board with the fact now that he is going to be here. Doesn't look like we would sack him. If he walks away, he walks away. That's a completely different kettle of fish. Every interview, I mean, he's had some, there was doubters. There still are doubters. It seems that in the fan base just recently, because of everything that's going off behind the scenes, you can look at it and go, well, okay, does he really need to be at Derby at this moment in time? No. Why is he with us? Well, clearly he wants to be. Great. That's always, that's always a great start for a fan base. And he is dealing with some crap. There's no doubt about that. The manager comes in, you can't sign this, you can't sign that. His hands are so tied. So he's actually getting a bit more respect from the fan base, in my opinion. Some people, again, will still disagree with that, but I think the majority are starting to warm to him now. Problem is, that's all well and good. It's all about what happens on the pitch, and there will be, Derby are in this situation, so he will get brought. I mean, he lost, I think, was it 1 win in 15 towards the back end of last season? I mean, that at any level would be a sacking, surely. Yeah. I don't see how it wouldn't be. Hence why I think I'm not so confident that Derby can sack him. I'm not sure they own the full rights to his contract, so be interesting. I believe that when he signed, he actually signed obviously a new deal. So I don't know if that's been funded by 32 Red, like his playing one was, or the majority of that. We're still sponsored by 32 Red, so you would presume so. It might be them calling the shots on that. Really don't know. I mean, if you've got a sponsor calling the shots over a chairman at a football club, I mean, that's a big red herring. That's just a huge warning sign. But there's plenty of warning signs at Derby at the moment. It's so you can never know what to believe. I'm happy to give him his chance. I think everybody has to be given a chance, and you've got to see where it goes from there. Is he able to bring in the players that he wants? Probably not. But on the flip side to that, you have many other managers at lower league clubs, other clubs that are just as restricted in terms of finances, not because they can't spend it, probably because they've not got it to spend.
Yeah.
And they manage, they manage to do a good enough job at certain places. So it's one of those. Obviously, as a fan, I hope for the best. I hope he really starts to show what he can do. We don't know how much his hands were tied last year. We kind of know how much that he's tied this year, in terms of players that he has to play and that kind of thing. So it's quite well known what he's got to work with. So the proof will be in the pudding. I'm happy to give him some time. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We've got an alert saying there's small remaining time, so we'll do a quick version of this next bit of about those two attempted takeovers. There was obviously one by one of Sheikh Mansour's cousins, which never went through, and then one by the self-proclaimed boxing world champion Eric Alonso. In a short answer, a couple of words maybe. What were your thoughts when you saw all this rubbish coming out of Eric Alonso, who, for those who didn't know, basically was bankrupt and had his bank accounts shut by the Spanish authorities?
I can give it you in one word: laughable.
Yeah, it was a joke of a. There was, I think it was one of those ones that you could see there was no way it was ever going to happen.
No, it was a big worry for fans. Just the fact that it was being entertained at board level. That was the big worry. And it, again, goes back to something I mentioned earlier. Mel wants out, and I think he's 100% lost passion for doing it, unfortunately. And yeah, I was glad to see the day that when that one fell through.
Yeah. Well, that's all we've got time for. Thanks for joining us, Jason. It's been great talking to you, and make sure everyone listening that you go and check out the Rams Review podcast. So yes, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening, everybody. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all new episodes. It's goodbye from me and Bobby. That was The Final Whistle.